Good Shabbos, everyone. Cousins and Ukrainian refugees, Lucia Orshoka and Alona Shugai, were among the millions who were running for their lives as Russian forces invaded their country of Ukraine. But in a wartime twist of fate, the cousins landed in Israel 2 weeks ago to a friendly face, someone who was repaying a decades-old kindness. The friendly face was a Jewish Israeli named Sharon Bass, whose Jewish grandmother was sheltered and saved by Lucia's non-Jewish grandmother in Ukraine during the Holocaust. Sharon said it was an honor to take in the cousins and return the immeasurable kindness from nearly 80 years ago. It was history repeating itself. But in this case, it's an inversion of the norm. We Jews have been persecuted throughout our entire history. We've been killed, kicked out, or forced to flee from almost every country we've stayed in long enough. But this time, in 2022, Jews have the privilege of being a safe haven for other fleeing non-Jewish refugees. Isn't that amazing? 74 years after its founding, Israel is considered a favorable destination for not only Jews fleeing Ukraine, but non-Jews as well. The Israeli Population Immigration Authority reported earlier this week that over 13,500 Ukrainian refugees have entered Israel since the outbreak of the war a month ago. How many of those 13,500 were Jewish? 3,500. 3,500 who were eligible for Israeli citizenship under the law of return. But the question remains in this difficult time where 10 million Ukrainians find themselves displaced. Over 4 million have already left their country. Should Israel welcome in more non-Jewish refugees? The debate on the absorption of refugees from Ukraine contrasts two conflicting values that Israel has always struggled with. The first value, to sustain Israel as a Jewish state by absorbing mainly Jews as immigrants. Our people were refused entry worldwide, as the Nazis said about their genocide. Israel was created too late to save those millions of Jews. And today, thank God, Israel is there to ensure that the Jewish people are never again vulnerable and helpless. Isn't that the point of having a Jewish state? Jews come first. Perhaps you've heard of the Struma. On December 12, 1941, the Struma sailed from Romania with 769 Jewish refugees aboard. The vessel, commissioned by the new Zionist organization in the Irgun, was the last to leave Europe in wartime. The ship was actually an old cargo barge used to carry cattle and suited for no more than 150 passengers. The objective was to anchor in Turkey, and from there to wait certificates for pre-state Israel. The small, unseaworthy ship broke down several times, and a trip that should have taken 14 hours took 3 days. The Turkish authorities prevented the passengers from leaving the ship once they docked in Turkey for fear that the British would not give them certificates and Turkey would be forced to give these refugees refuge. There was an acute shortage of food and drinking water, despite help provided by the Jewish community of Istanbul. The passengers suffered from cold, filth, and hunger. And the ship remained in Istanbul for 70 days while the Jewish Agency and the Joint Distribution Committee tried to convince the British government to allow the ship to bring the refugees to pre-state Israel. The British refused to yield and pressured the Turks to return the ship to Romania to discourage further immigration from the Balkans. Despite the despairing appeals of the captain that the ship was unable to continue on its way, the Turkish authorities forcibly towed the Struma into the Black Sea. On the following day, a mighty explosion was heard and the ship went down. Later, it was determined the ship had been sunk by a torpedo from a Russian submarine. The only survivor of those 769 Jewish refugees fleeing for their lives was a young man named David Stoliar. A Coast Guard rowboat picked him up. Initially, he was taken to a military hospital in Istanbul, but to add insult to injury, The Turkish authorities put him in jail for being in Turkey illegally. After 71 days, the British government granted him an exception and allowed him to enter pre-state Israel. To me, this has always been one of the worst stories from the Holocaust, and there are many, as we know. Jews with nowhere to go because there was no Israel. Yes, there are two values that confront the Jewish state. One, to be a state first and foremost for the Jewish people, so there are never more strumas. But there's a second value, the desire to act in the world as a moral agent. Israel is there to uphold the moral core of our Jewish faith, the faith that has sustained us in exile for thousands of years. They require all of us as Jews to serve as a light unto the nations and to remember the Talmudic obligation: whoever saves a single life is considered to have saved the entire world. We know better than anyone what happens when the world shuts its doors. When there are refugees that need saving, perhaps Israel shouldn't even ask them who they are, rather, just what they need. You may remember the story from 1975 when Menachem Begin was the first Likud prime minister of Israel. And in April of 1975, North Vietnamese communists defeated the South Vietnam regime. Hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese secretly fled South Vietnam to escape communist persecution and torture. Many escaped in small, unreliable boats and faced harsh weather and threats from pirates as they were turned away by neighboring local authorities. More and more Vietnamese began escaping. On June 10, 1977, an Israeli cargo ship en route to Japan crossed paths with a boat full of 66 Vietnamese refugees. They were out of food and water, were extremely lost and scared, and their boat was leaking. Their SOS signals had gone ignored by passing East German, Norwegian, Japanese, and Panamanian boats. But the Israeli captain and crew immediately offered food and water and decided to bring the passengers on board and transported them to Israel. And once in Israel, Menachem Begin authorized the Vietnamese boat people with Israeli citizenship, comparing their situation to the plight of Jewish refugees seeking a haven during the Holocaust. Between 1977 and 1979, Israel welcomed over 300 Vietnamese refugees. Growing up as a child, when I was told this story, I was inspired to love my Jewish country even more. And yet some may say that welcoming in too many non-Jews will create a problem for Israel's Jewish demographics. Today in Israel, approximately 80% of Israel's 9 million citizens are Jewish. Israel has a legitimate need to maintain a resounding Jewish demographic majority so that Israel never has to choose between being a democracy and being a Jewish state. Welcoming thousands of non-Jewish Ukrainians could alter Israel's demographics. But is it realistic to expect that many non-Jewish Ukrainians to permanently stay in Israel? It's not exactly an easy journey from Ukraine to Israel. And not many Ukrainians without Jewish ties are going to prioritize the Jewish state. And Ukrainian arrivals from the war zone without Jewish ties are unlikely to remain once the war is over. God willing, they'll be able to go home. In many cases, their fathers and their husbands remain there now fighting the Russians. Therefore, is it paranoia to believe that welcoming non-Jewish Ukrainians endangers Israel's Jewish demographic character? During a recent visit to a border crossing between Romania and Ukraine, Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said, "We won't close our gates and our hearts to those who lost everything." He called for Israel to be even more generous about letting those in who are escaping the war. He added, it's Israel's obligation not only to be good Jews, but to be good people. And perhaps Israel's chief rabbi, David Lau, put it best when he said that Israel should welcome those refugees that don't find another country, at least until they can return to their homes. And then, with the sort of Jewish memory one has a right to expect, he said, so there won't be a situation in which a person flees the hostility and has nowhere to go, no safe haven. And he acknowledged that granting them residency or even citizenship is something else entirely, But first of all, he said, open the door. Open the door. Yes, there are two conflicting values that the Jewish state continues to deal with. The desire to sustain Israel as a Jewish state, that is to absorb mainly Jews as immigrants. And the second, the desire to act in the world as a moral agent. How do you reconcile a conflict between these two all-important values? For now, compromise has been the answer, the accepted way. In Israel's case, this means working to rescue as many Jews as possible. Some estimations believe that up to 100,000 Ukrainian Jews may end up immigrating to Israel in the following months, and to take in non-Jews who choose Israel as a destination. Left-wing politicians in Israel are suspicious, with some justification, that right-wing leaders are not sensitive enough to the human rights of the non-Jewish Ukrainians. And right-wing politicians are suspicious, with some justification, that left-wing elected leaders are more excited about saving refugees than about saving Jewish refugees. But in reality, the policy gap between these two factions is not that wide. No one who is taken seriously wants Israel to implement a heartless policy of refusing refugees. And so far, no elected leaders want Israel to be the central absorber of faraway refugees. My friends, is that good enough for the Jewish state? This evening, we're honored to have some members here who wanted to spend a few moments telling us about a very worthwhile organization that they have that are directly helping Ukrainians, Jews and non-Jews. We're honored this evening to have Irene Bleyzer. Irene, if you raise your hand, we're going to stand up. And Irene, you are here with your niece, Rena. And Rena, you immigrated from the Soviet Union as a Jewish refugee in 1978, settling here in Houston along with your parents, Michael and Natasha. Your family returned to their native Ukraine after its independence in 1991 to launch an investment business that has employed 30,000 people in Ukraine over the last 30 years. You also launched DAR, a charitable foundation, in 2002, and you mobilized that foundation to provide humanitarian aid to the people of Ukraine. Rena, you and your families are members of the Houston Congregation for Reform Judaism, where your son, Austin, became a bar mitzvah this past January. So I've asked Rena to spend just a moment with all of you this evening to tell you a little bit more about the life-saving work they're now doing to help those in the Ukraine. Please welcome Rena.
Shabbat Shalom. Mazel Tov to Sydney and the Ryder family. I'd like to thank them and Rabbi Strauss for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Rena Bleyzer O'Malley, and I'm a Ukrainian American. The United States has been my home since I came to this country at the age of 4 as a Jewish refugee. But for the last 29 days, and really for the last 8 years, my heart has been with my family's homeland of Ukraine. On February 24th, as you all know, after 8 years of aggression, Russia invaded Ukraine outright with missiles launched at every major city in the country. Overnight, the lives of 44 million innocent people were changed. Imagine coming home from work, feeding your children dinner, putting them to bed, then waking up at 5 a.m. to explosions, air raid sirens, and announcements to head to your nearest bomb shelter. Millions have fled to neighboring countries, but most have stayed behind to fight and to protect their country. Our family has spent the last 29 days checking in daily, multiple times a day even, to make sure our loved ones are still alive. It's not just our past or a distant country we watch on TV. You see, other than just being immigrants from Ukraine, our family has spent the last 30 years running a large business there. And we have hundreds, actually thousands of people we love and care about directly in harm's way. While these past 29 days have been enormously stressful for our family here in Houston, it's nothing compared to what the brave people of Ukraine have been dealing with. As Russia continues to bomb and shell civilian areas, homes, schools, hospitals, destroying infrastructure that provides basic services like running water or power during what's still very much winter, the suffering that's occurring is beyond anything I could have imagined. I can tell you, without a doubt, it's worse than what you see on TV. It's worse than any of you could imagine. For the last 20 years, we've also operated a charitable foundation in Ukraine called DAR. DAR is the Ukrainian word for gift. Initially launched to help disadvantaged youth, DAR shifted gears in 2014 after Russia's occupation of Crimea and invasion of Donbass to provide assistance to the front lines. We've now mobilized our foundation to provide humanitarian aid on a much larger scale. Because of our history in the country and our network of contacts in every region of Ukraine, we're uniquely positioned to actually get aid into the hands of the people who need it most. While many organizations are providing support to the overwhelming number of refugees, our focus at DAR is to help those Ukrainians remaining in country currently in conflict zones. Quite simply, our goal is to help keep them alive. We're already actively shipping medical supplies, medicine, water treatment devices, MREs, and whatever else is being asked of us to provide for the basic needs of those Ukrainians enduring this nightmare, so that they may survive another day. Please continue to pray for the people of Ukraine and help them in any way you can. If you'd like to support our efforts, you can visit standwithukrainefund.org. You can ask me for any information you'd like at the end of the service. I'll stick around for a little while. And thank you so much again for your time and for your attention. Slava Ukraini.
Irene and Rena, thank you very much. And we've also posted information about your organization on our social media sites. And we wish you Godspeed in all the wonderful work, important work you're doing.